Section 26 of the Endeavour Journal of Sir Joseph Banks. Journal from 25 August 1768 to 12 July 1771 by Joseph Banks. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Section 26. November 1769, Part 1. 1769, November 1. Calm in the morn. At sunrise we counted 45 canoes, who were coming towards us from different parts of the shore. 7 soon came up with us, and after some conversation with Tupaya, began to sell mussels and lobsters, of which they had great plenty. In the beginning they dealt fair, but soon began to cheat, taking what we gave them without making any return. One who had done so on being threatened began to defy us and laugh, on which a musket was fired over the boat, which instantly brought him back, and made trade very regular for some time. At length, the cabin and gun-room having got as much as they wanted, the men were allowed to come to the gangway and trade for themselves, and I must say that there was not the same care taken to prevent their being cheated as had been before, by which neglect the Indians soon began to cheat with impunity, and to despise our threats, the consequence of which was that as soon as they had sold all they had got, one of the boats pulled forward, and seeing some linen which was hanging overboard, a man in her untied it without ceremony and put it into his bundle. He was called to, but instead of returning it, let his boat drop astern and laughed at us. A musket was fired over him, which did not at all spoil his mirth. Small shot was then fired at him, which struck him upon the back. Heated, I suppose he was, for he regarded it less than most men would do a stripe, just shrinking his body without ceasing to bundle up the very linen he had stole, which he was at the moment employed about. The boats dropped astern about 100 yards, and several musket balls were fired near them, but they continued their song of defiance till the ship had left them 300 or 400 yards. A round shot was then fired, which went over them and struck the water 3 or 4 times at a large distance beyond them. This effectually showed them that they could not easily get out of our reach, for they immediately began to paddle and proceed quite ashore without stopping to look behind them. Just at nightfall we were under a small island, from whence came off a large double canoe, or rather 2 canoes, lashed together at the distance of about a foot, which was covered with boards, so as to make a kind of deck. She came pretty near the ship, and the people in her talked with Tupaya, with much seeming friendship. But when it was just dark, they ran their canoe close to the ship, and threw in 3 or 4 stones, after which they paddled ashore. 1769, November 2. Passed this morn between an island and the main, which appeared low and sandy, with a remarkable hill inland, flat and smooth as a molehill, though very high and large. Many canoes and people were seen along shore. Some followed us, but could not overtake us. A sailing canoe that had chased us ever since daybreak came up with us, and proved the same double canoe as pelted us last night, which made us prepare for another volley of their ammunition, dangerous to nothing on board but our windows. The event proved as we expected, for after having sailed with us an hour, they threw their stones again. A musket was fired over them, and they dropped astern, not, I believe, at all frightened by the musket, but content with having showed their courage by twice insulting us. We now begin to know these people, and are much less afraid of any daring attempt from them than we were. At 12 the country appeared low, with small cliffs near the shore, but seemingly very fertile inland. We saw plainly with our glasses villages larger than any we had before seen, situated on the tops of cliffs, in places almost inaccessible, besides which they were guarded by a deep fosse and a high paling within it, so that probably these people are much given to war. In the evening the country low as before. Many towns were in sight, larger than those at noon, always situated like them on the tops of cliffs, and fenced in the same manner. Under them upon the beach were very many large canoes, some hundreds I may safely say, some of which either had or appeared to have awnings, but not one of them were put off. From all these circumstances we judged the country to be much better peopled hereabouts, and inhabited by richer people than we had seen before. May be it was the residence of some of their princes. As far as we have yet gone along the coast from Cape Turnagain to this place, the people have acknowledged only one chief, Tiratu. If his dominion is really so large, he may have princes or governors under him capable of drawing together a vast many people. For himself, he is always said to live far inland. 1769, November 3. Continent appeared this morn barren and rocky, but many islands were in sight, chiefly inhabited with such towns upon them as we saw yesterday. 2 canoes put off from one, but could not overtake us. At breakfast, a cluster of islands and rocks were in sight, which made an uncommon appearance from the number of perpendicular rocks, or needles, as the seamen call them, which were in sight at once. These we called the Court of Aldermen in respect to that worthy body, and entertained ourselves some time with giving names to each of them from their resemblance, thick and squat or lank and tall, to some one or other of those respectable citizens. Soon after this we passed an island on which were houses built on the steep sides of cliffs, inaccessible, I had almost said, to birds. How their inhabitants could ever have got to them much surpassed my comprehension. At present, however, we saw none, so that these situations are probably no more than places to retire to in case of danger, which are totally evacuated in peaceable times. At 12 the continent appeared still rocky and barren. Few houses were seen. They were not built in towns, but stood separate. About dinner time, 3 canoes came alongside, of much the most simple construction of any we have seen, being no more than the trunks of trees hollowed out by fire, without the least carving or even the addition of a washboard on their gunwales. The people in them were almost naked and blacker than any we have seen, only 21 in all. Yet these few despicable gentry sang their song of defiance, and promised us as heartily as the most respectable of their countrymen that they would kill us all. They remained some time out of stone's throw, but at last ventured close to the ship. One of our people gave them a rope from the side to save them the trouble of paddling. This they accepted, and rewarded the man who gave it by thrusting at him with a pike, which however took no effect. They then went a few yards from the ship, and threw a lance into her, which struck nobody. A musket was fired over them, on which they all went off. Late in the evening the ship came into a bay, which appeared well sheltered by islands, and gave hopes for the morn. Several canoes with people like the last came about the ship, and talked very civilly to us. A bird was shot from the ship in their sight as it swam on the water. This they took up, and tied to a fishing line that was towing astern, for which they were rewarded with a piece of cloth. Notwithstanding all this, they became very saucy, just at night singing their song of defiance and attempting to tow away the buoy of the anchor. 2 or 3 muskets were fired over them, which had not the least effect. They threatened hard, and promised that tomorrow they would return with more force and kill us all, and dispatched a boat who told us he was going to another part of the bay for assistance. 1769, November 4. Our friends meant to be still better than their word, for they visited us twice in the night, intending, I suppose, to wake us if we should be asleep. But as they found us not so, they went away as they came, without saying a single word. In the morn they returned with the earliest daybreak, about 150 men in 10 or 12 canoes, all armed with pikes, lances, and stones. We all got up to see the event. An hour and a half was spent in conversation, sometimes civil, sometimes otherwise. Our resolution was, that as we had in vain showed them the power of muskets by firing near them, and killing the bird yesterday, we would, on the first provocation they gave us, fire at them with small shot. The last resource we had to show them our superiority, without taking away their lives. They at length offered to trade for their arms, and sold 2 weapons very fairly, but took a price for the third and refused to send it up, but offered it for a second. The second was sent down, but a third was required, instead of the weapon being parted with. This was a convenient time for the execution of our project, as the man who had thus cheated us swaggered prodigiously, having paddled the boat a few yards from the ship. Accordingly, a musket ball was fired through the bottom of the boat, and a small shot at the offender, which struck him and another who sat next him, on which the canoe was immediately paddled off, and remained about 100 yards from the ship. But what was truly surprising was that though the men who were shot bled a good deal, not one of the other boats went near them, or inquired at all how much or in what manner they were hurt. They returned to the ship and renewed trade for their arms, a large quantity of which they sold, without attempting to play any tricks. At last, however, one gentleman paddled off, with 2 different types of cloth, which had been given for one weapon. He got about 100 yards from the ship, and thought himself safe. A musket was fired after him, which fortunately struck the boat, just at the water's edge, and consequently made 2 holes in her. The people in her and the rest of the canoes paddled hard. As a finishing stroke to convince them of our superiority, a round shot was fired over them, and not a boat stopped till they got ashore. Soon after this the captain went in boats to seek a place for the ship to stay, that she might observe the transit of Mercury. It rained, and as we were sure of staying 5 days, Dr. Solander and myself stayed on board. The Indians ashore were neither friends nor foes. They showed, however, much fear whenever our boats approached them. After dinner, the ship removed to a place he had found, where were great many of birds, much celery, and good hopes of fish. 1769, November 5. This morn some canoes came off, but brought nothing to sell. One old man, whose name was Torava, came on board. He seemed to be the chief both today and yesterday, but in all the transactions of yesterday he was observed to behave sensibly and well, laying in a small canoe always near the ship, and at all times speaking civilly to those on board. With some persuasion he ventured down into the cabin and had presents, cloth, iron, etc., given him. He told us that the Indians were now very much afraid of us. We promised friendship if they would supply us with provisions at their own price. After breakfast we went ashore on the banks of a river. The Indians who were on one side made all the signs of friendship imaginable, beckoning to us to land among them. It suited our convenience for hauling the seine and shooting birds, of which there were great numbers, to land on the other side, and it was not without much persuasion that they, about noon, ventured over to us. The seine was hauled with no success, but several birds were shot, like sea pies but black, with red bills and feet. The trawl and drudge were also today employed, and caught nothing but a few shells. The people who stayed by the boats saw 2 Indians fight on some quarrel of their own. They began with lances, which were soon taken from them by the old men, but they were allowed to continue their battle, which they did like Englishmen, with their fists, for some time, after which all of them retired behind a little hill, so that our people did not see the event of the combat. 1769, November 6. Went ashore, Indians as yesterday very tame. Their habitations certainly were at a distance, as they had no houses, but slept under the bushes. The bay may be a place to which parties of them often resort for the sake of shellfish, which are here very plentiful. Indeed, wherever we went, on hills or in valleys, in woods or plains, we continually met with vast heaps of shells, often many wagon loads together, some appearing to be very old. Wherever these were, it is more than probable that parties of Indians had at some time or other taken up their residence, as our Indians had made much such a pile about them. The country in general was very barren, but the tops of the hills were covered with a very large fern, the roots of which they had got together in large quantities, as they said, to carry away with them. We did not see any kind of cultivation. In the evening I walked up the river, which at the mouth looks very fine and broad. It, in 2 miles or less, shoaled to nothing. The country inland was still more barren than that near the seaside. 1769, November 7. Rain and most disagreeable weather all day kept us on board, as well as the Indians from coming off to us. 1769, November 8. Fine weather, and many canoes came off. In them our friend Torava. While he was alongside, he saw 2 canoes coming from the opposite side of the bay, on which he immediately went ashore with all canoes, telling us that he was afraid. He, however, soon returned, finding, I suppose, that the canoes had not in them the people he expected. In the 2 boats came an amazing number of fish of the mackerel kind, which the people sold for little or nothing, so that all hands had today fish enough. We went ashore and botanized with our usual good success, which could not be doubted in a country so totally new. In the evening we went to our friends the Indians, that we might see the method in which they slept. It was as they had told us, on the bare ground, without more shelter than a few shrubs over their heads. The women and children were placed innermost, or farthest from the sea. The men lay in a kind of half circle around them, and on the trees close by them were ranged their arms, in order. So no doubt they are afraid of an attack from some enemy not far off. They do not acknowledge any superior king, which all we have before seen have done. So possibly these are a set of outlaws from Tiratu's kingdom. Their having no cultivation or houses makes it clear, at least, that it is either so, or this is not their real habitation. They say, however, that they have houses and a fort, somewhere at a distance, but do not say that even there is any cultivation. 1769, November 9. At daybreak this morn a vast number of boats were on board, almost loaded with mackerel of 2 sorts, one exactly the same as is caught in England. We concluded that they had caught a large shoal and sold us the over, plus what they could not consume, as they set very little value upon them. It was, however, a fortunate circumstance for us, as by 8 o'clock the ship had more fish on board than all hands could eat in 2 or 3 days, and before night so many that every mess who could raise salt corned as many as will last them this month or more. After an early breakfast the astronomer went on shore to observe the transit of Mercury, which he did without the smallest cloud intervening to obstruct him. A fortunate circumstance, as except yesterday and today we have not had a clear day for some time. About noon we were alarmed by the report of a great gun fired from the ship, the occasion of which was thus. 2 canoes came to the ship, very large and full of people. They showed by their behaviour that they were quite strangers, or at least so much so as not to be at all afraid. They soon entered into trade, and almost immediately cheated by taking the cloth which was given to them, without returning that which was bargained for. On this they immediately began to sing their war song, as if to defy any revenge those on board might choose to take. This enraged the second lieutenant so much that he levelled a musket at the man who had still got the cloth in his hand, and shot him dead. The canoes went off to some distance, but did not quite go away. It was necessary to send a boat ashore, so lest they might attempt to revenge his death upon the boat, a round shot was fired over them, which had the desired effect of putting them to flight immediately. The news of this event was immediately brought on shore to our Indians, who were at first a little alarmed, and retreated from us in a body. In a little time, however, they returned on their own accords and acknowledged that the dead man deserved his punishment. Unasked by us, who thought his fate severe, knowing as we did that small shot would have had almost or quite as good an effect, with little danger to his life, which, though forfeited to the laws of England, we could not but wish to spare, if it could be done without subjecting ourselves to the derision and consequently to the attacks of these people, which we have now learned to fear, not lest they should kill us, but lest we should be reduced to the necessity of killing a number of them, which must be the case should they ever in reality attack us. A little before sunset we went home with the Indians to see them eat their supper. It consisted of fish, shellfish, lobsters, and birds. These were dressed either by broiling them upon a skewer, which was stuck into the ground leaning over the fire, or in ovens, which we called them at Tahiti, which were holes in the ground filled with provision and hot stones, and covered over with leaves and earth. Here we saw a woman who mourned after their fashion for a dead relation. She sat on the ground near the rest who, except one, seemed not at all to regard her. The tears constantly trickled down her cheeks. She repeated in a low but very mournful voice words which we did not at all understand, still at every sentence cutting her arms, face, or breast with a shell she held in her hand, so that she was almost covered with blood, a most affecting spectacle. The cuts she made, however, were so managed as seldom to draw blood, and when they did, to pierce a very small way into the flesh. But this is not always the case with them, for many we have seen, and some were among these very people, who had shocking large scars on their arms, thighs, breasts, cheeks, etc., which they told us had been done in this manner and upon this occasion. Maybe they proportion the depth of their cuts to the regard they have for the deceased. 1769, November 10. This day was employed in an excursion to view the large river at the bottom of the bay, which lay at some distance from it. The mouth of it proved to be a good harbour with water sufficient for our ship, but scarce for a larger. The stream in many places very wide, with large flats of mangroves, which at low water are covered. We went up about a league, where it was still wider than at the mouth, and divided itself into innumerable channels, separated by mangrove flats, the whole several miles in breadth, the water shoal, so we agreed to stop our disquisition here, and go ashore to dine. A tree in the neighbourhood, on which were many shags' nests and old shags, setting by them, confirmed our resolution. An attack was consequently made on the shags, and about 20 soon killed, and as soon broiled and eat, every one declaring that they were excellent food, as indeed I think they were. Hunger is certainly the most excellent sauce, but since our fowls and ducks have been gone, we find ourselves able to eat any kind of birds, for indeed we throw away none, without even that kind of seasoning. Fresh provision to a seaman must always be most acceptable, if he can get over the small prejudices which once affected several in this ship, most or all of whom are now by virtue of good example completely cured. Our repast ended, we proceeded down the river again. At the mouth of it was a small Indian village, where we landed, and were most civilly received by the inhabitants, who treated us with hot cockles, at least a small flat shellfish, most delicious food, talina. Near the village was the ruins of an old Indian ipa, or fort, which we went to see. It was situate on the point of a peninsula, inaccessible on 3 sides from the steepness of the cliffs. The fourth was guarded by a ditch, the bank of which, nearest the fort, could not be less than 20 feet high. There has also been palisades both on the inside and outside of the ditch, but of these nothing was left but thick posts, almost rotten. Was any ship to winter or stay any time here, this would be a most excellent place to set up tents, as it is sufficiently spacious. 1769, November 11. Rain and blowing weather all this day, so that no canoes came off, nor did we go ashore. An oyster bank had been found at the river by the wooding place, about half a mile up on the starboard hand, just above a small island, which is covered at high water. Here the longboat was sent, and soon returned, deep loaded with, I sincerely believe, as good oysters as ever came from Colchester, and about the same size. They were laid down under the booms, and employed the ship's company very well, who I verily think did nothing but eat, from the time they came on board till night, by which time a large part were expended. But that gave us no kind of uneasiness, as we knew well that not the boat only but the ship might be easily loaded in one tide almost, as they are dry at half ebb. 1769, November 12. 2 canoes came early this morn, who appeared to be strangers, who had heard of us by the caution and fear they showed in approaching the ship. 2 of them were, however, persuaded to come on board, and the rest traded for what they had very fairly. A small canoe also came from the other side of the bay, and sold some large fish, which had been taken the day before yesterday, as yesterday it blew too hard for any canoes to go to sea. After breakfast we all went ashore to see an Indian fort or ipa in the neighbourhood, uncertain however what kind of reception we should meet with, as they might be jealous of letting us into it, where probably all their valuable effects were lodged. We went to a bay where were 2. We landed first near the small one, the most beautifully romantic thing I ever saw. It was built on a small rock, detached from the main, and surrounded at high water. The top of this was fenced around with rails, after their manner, but was not large enough to contain above 5 or 6 houses. The whole appeared totally inaccessible to any animal who was not furnished with wings. Indeed, it was only approachable by one very narrow and steep path, but what made it the most truly romantic was that much of the largest part of it was hollowed out into an arch, which penetrated quite through it, and was in height not less than 20 yards perpendicular above the water which ran through it. The inhabitants on our approach came down and invited us to go in, but we refused, intending to visit a much larger and more perfect one about a mile off. We spent, however, some little time in making presents to their women. In the meantime we saw the inhabitants of the other one come down from it, men, women, and children, about 100 in number, and march towards us. As soon as they came near enough, they waved and called haere, and sat down in the bushes near the beach, a sure mark of their good intentions. We went to them and made a few presents, and asked leave to go to their ipa, which they with joy invited us to do, and immediately accompanied us to it. It was called Wharetoa, and was situate on the end of a hill where it jutted out into the sea, which washed 2 sides of it. These were sufficiently steep, but not absolutely inaccessible. Up one of the land sides, which was also steep, went the road. The other was flat and open to the side of the hill. The whole was enclosed by a palisade about 10 feet high, made of strong pales, bound together with withes. The weak side next the hill had also a ditch, the face of which, next the palisade, we measured to be 20 1/2 feet in depth. Besides this, over the palisade was built a fighting stage, of which they called porava, which is a flat stage covered with boughs of trees, upon which they stand to throw darts or stones at their assailants, out of danger of their weapons. The dimension of it were thus: the height from the ground 20 1/2 feet, breadth 6 feet 6, the length 43 feet. Upon it were laid bundles of darts and heaps of stones, ready in case of an attack. One of the young men, at our desire, went up to show their method of fighting. Another went to the outside of the ditch to act assailant. They both sung their war song and danced the same frightful gesticulations as we have often seen them. threatening each other with their weapons. This I suppose they do in their attacks to work themselves to a sufficient fury of courage, for what we call calm resolution is, I believe, found in few uncivilized people. The side next the road was also defended by a stage like this, but much lower. The other two were by their steepness and the palisade thought sufficiently secure. The inside was divided into, I believe, 20 larger and smaller divisions, some of which contained not more than 1 or 2 houses, others 12 or 14. Every one of these were enclosed by its own palisade, though not so high and strong as the general one. In these were vast heaps of dried fish and fern roots, piled up in heaps, so much that had they had water I should have thought them well prepared for a siege, but that must be fetched from a brook below, so probably they do not use to besiege a town as we do in Europe. Without the fence were many houses and large nets, which I suppose were brought in upon any alarm. There was also about 1/2 an acre of gourds and sweet potatoes planted, the only cultivation we have seen in the bay. End of section 26. Part 1 of November, 1769.